Welcome to today's event, Dimensions of Global Military Strategy. We're delighted once again to be partnering with the Eisenhower Series College Program of the U.S. Army War College to welcome our four speakers to the virtual stage today. First up is Colonel Leon Perkowski. He's a professor at the Army War College and the director of its Eisenhower Series College Program. He holds a bachelor's degree in meteorology from Cornell University, a master's degree in environmental pollution control from Penn State, and a PhD in the history of U.S. foreign relations from Kent State University. Prior to his current assignment, Colonel Perkowski served as an associate dean at the Air War College and as an associate dean and vice commandant at the Air Command and Staff College. Second up will be Lieutenant Colonel Adesa King, who graduated from the United States Military Academy in 2000 as an infantry officer. He has served in mechanized airborne and air assault units in the US and Korea and had multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, where he most recently served as a task force commander and senior advisor to Iraqi Army commanders. Additionally, Colonel King served in the Senate Liaison Division with the Defense Department's Office of Chief of Legislative Liaisons in Washington, D.C., and as the military aide to the Secretary of the Army. Third up will be Lieutenant Colonel Rena Henderson Alailima, who's an engineer with the Missouri National Guard, which she joined in 2013 following 11 years of service in the U.S. Army. Colonel Henderson Alailima graduated from West Point with a degree in civil engineering, and she holds a master's degree in engineering management. She has extensive experience in program management and operational planning and has deployed to Afghanistan and Korea. Before attending the Army War College, Colonel Henderson Alailima commanded the 7th Weapons of Mass Destruction Civil Support Team. Last but not least is Brigadier General Abdul Sami of Pakistan, who holds a master's in public policy and strategic security management from National Defense University, Islamabad, a master's degree from the University of Baluchistan, and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Military College of Engineering, Pakistan. General Sami has held various command, staff, and instructional appointments in infantry and engineering formation across various regions of Pakistan, including ones closely associated with the Pakistan-Afghan border fencing project. Before attending the U.S. Army War College, he was the chief of staff of an Army Corps stationed in Karachi. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to be with us here today. I will turn the program over to Colonel Perkowski, who will moderate today's exciting conversation.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone who's watching us today. I'd like to thank Perry House for inviting us to be with you here. And before we get into our presentations, I wanted to provide you a little context about what the Army War College is, what our Eisenhower program does, and then frame today's topics for you today. So the Army War College is located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and is our senior school for educating Army officers. When our officers reach the rank of lieutenant colonel or the equivalent in other services, they compete for a selective opportunity to attend a war college, where they will receive 10 months graduate education that will help prepare them for the next level of responsibility as senior leaders in our armed forces. One of the goals of the War College is to help prepare these expert military practitioners to advise policymakers who might lack extensive military knowledge or experience. To be effective advisors, our students are trying to become more effective communicators with civilians like yourselves by better explaining their own military perspectives and also better understanding your perspectives. And that's where the Eisenhower program comes in. We've been around for more than 50 years. We started during the Vietnam War, and our goal is to help bridge the civil-military divide and improve mutual understanding of national security issues. We do that by engaging in dialogue with college campuses and community groups around the country, where we speak with people who are interested in national security issues, but who likely don't have deep military experience, exactly the kind of people that our graduates will be working with in the near future. This program is an elective for our students, and we ask our students to broaden their knowledge by researching the topics they present to you. Thus, they should not be considered true subject matter experts on the topic, but rather they provide an informed military perspective on the topic. Now, Perry House has asked us to present a wide diversity of topics for you today, but all of these topics can be unified in a certain framework to national security. And I would like to draw upon the late Colin Gray, a renowned scholar of strategy, and his 17 dimensions of strategy. And these dimensions of strategy can be roughly grouped into those that are inward looking and those that are outward looking. And for today, Colonel King's topic on diversity, equity, and inclusion is an example of an inward-looking dimension that suggests how we can be a more effective force by attracting and retaining diverse talent. Colonel Henderson Ali-Alima's topic on climate change has external dimensions, which Perry House has done some great work to explore, but it also has internal dimensions, and she will focus on the internal dimensions of the challenges of preparing our forces to operate effectively as we deal with the effects of climate change. And finally, Brigadier General Sami will provide us with an external perspective on Pakistan's interaction with China's Belt and Road Initiative. Before I hand this off to our first guest today, I want to make sure you all understand that the opinions we express today are our own and do not necessarily represent the official position of the Department of Defense or the government of Pakistan. And so without further ado, I would like to hand it off to our first speaker, Lieutenant Colonel King. Adesa, over to you, please.
All right, good. All right, so let's get this thing started here. So listen, I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. I've been in the Army for about 25 years, and I got two daughters, teenage daughters, and every now and then they try to teach me some TikTok dances. Right now, it's 0 to 5. But see, that's a domestic challenge that I have. But I'm not here to talk about that. What I want to do is focus on some internal challenges that the U.S. military faces. First, there's this persistent lack of racial ethnic minorities in the armed services, especially in the senior ranks. Second, what I find out is the U.S. military has a potential to rush to failure with initiatives and programs to address these challenges. So I want to do three things. One, I want to describe this vicious cycle that I'm talking about that leads to the rush to failure. Two, I want to provide an approach to discover the core problem, that source of that core problem. And then three, I want to initiate a dialogue that facilitates a collaboration in addressing these issues. So let's talk about the first, number one, that vicious cycle. See, first, military leaders, we feel an increased pressure to find a solution. Second, we implement what I call just multiple initiatives and address these challenges without really evaluating the source of the core problem. Third, the military departments get busier and more complex, yet produces disappointing results. Fourth, the military members, units, and departments continue to encounter challenges. Then we go back to the first step and start all over again. See, authors Christine Cox and Yishi Ashlad, in their book, Stop Decorating the Fish, describe this vicious cycle that organizations, governments, and businesses fall into when developing solutions that attack the wrong problem. So before providing you that second approach, let me share you my lived experience. So there's this non-doctrinal term that my peers, that we kind of call each other. It's a term of endearment, but it's consistently something that we see throughout our military career. The word is unicorn. Unicorn. See, I'm in infantry, jump out of planes, as told you before, several deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan and in Korea, assisted in Hurricane Katrina, worked in Washington, D.C. The thing that makes me a unicorn is that I happen to be a Black combat arms officer. That combat arms officer is an infantry, armor, or artillery. And right now, there's only 7% of combat arms officers that are Black. So let me put this in perspective for you. Imagine the University of Pennsylvania has about 26,000 students, full-time, part-time, and it's diverse. In that, let's say there's about 78 professors that are guiding the students. These professors can influence and inspire, correct? So imagine if only 2 of them, which is about 7% of the professors, were a minority. If those professors were to represent, are supposed to represent the society that they serve, then it should be about 12.7%, or about 9 of those professors of them should have been minorities. So this is my lived experience, and this is what I deal with. So now let's move quickly to number 2, the approach. What I call is getting your OODA loop on. OODA loop. That is, you observe, orient, decide, then you act. So right now we need to observe and understand the environment to kind of really tease out this core problem. According to the 2018 demographic profile report for the military, it provided some data from 2010 to 2018. There were 20,000 racial minority service members. It was a decline of 20,000 racial minority members in the military. In 2019, the demographic report with the racial minorities is that there was a 9,000 increase. So it's about 404,000 and it moved to 413,000. So in December 15th, that's right, 2020, the Department of Defense, they released a diversity and inclusion report, and it focused on recommendations to improve racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion within the military. There were 15 specific actionable recommendations. Also in the report, it reviewed a 2009 study that was done, a 2-year study that was done, and that had several recommendations. Now here is where we look at, and I said, we need to stop and understand this data. See, in that 2020 report, it stated that all the recommendations that were put in 2009, that they were in place, that they were actually fully implemented. If that is the case, then why do we have the decline with over 20,000 racial minorities from 2010 to 2018? And then in 2019, there was this 9,000 increase. Why? If we don't understand this, then we're enter into that vicious cycle and attacking the wrong problem. So observe, orient. See, I'm now beginning to look at, hey, let's look at this 9,000 and what it might reveal to the source of the core problem. I looked deeper and I learned that there was something different about the officer corps. I discovered that racial minority numbers for officers marginally increased across all the services from 2010 to 2019, but it decreased in the Army. Why is that? So in that report, it infers that bias and prejudice might have played a role in that decline. See, although the military has been a leader in racial integration and inclusion, we're not immune to the perils of bias and prejudice. However, I'm not sure if we really have discovered the source of that core problem. Fortunately, right now, the Army People Strategy, it calls for a plan to acquire, develop, and employ and retain the best and brightest of America's talent in that pool. So this is a start where you begin to really orient and figure out the estimates and assumptions and analysis to gain really better understanding. So observe, orient, now it's time to decide. So here's where I look at outside industries for bring a perspective on what makes a sustainable change. See, Paloma Medina, she's a public speaker and an executive trainer, describe what researchers have proven how people and organizations achieve daunting goals. You have to verbalize that goal, you have to make it measurable, and you have to make it time bound. See, currently Department of Defense goal is this: ensure that our ranks reflect and inclusive of the American people that we are sworn to protect and defend, but it's not measurable right now, and it's not time bound right now. So this can be problematic, especially when there's a transition. So now we move into act. So observe, orient, decide, now act. Now action includes dissemination, execution, monitoring, and the most important, it is feedback, because there's no plan survives first implementation, none. So therefore we must have an opportunity, we must create opportunities and decision time for leaders to really see and how we can change this problem and address this problem. But the process is continuous. More, it enables leaders to really look at and evaluate over a depth of issues that we may see that arise, because it is a complex issue. Now, the thing is this. I know you're asking me, you're probably thinking, what is the core problem? What is the core problem? Why has the number of active duty officers increased from all of the services? Is it racism? Is it implicit bias? Is it a lack of recruiting? Is it a lack of mentorship? Is it a lack of modeling at the historical Black colleges and universities? Is there a lack of interest from the community? What about any of the stakeholders? Is it a lack of the congressmen and congresswomen not supporting nominations? Remember how we started. Number one, look at the vicious cycle. Number two, look at the approach to discover the source of the core problem. This leads us to number 3, initiate some kind of dialogue, a dialogue that facilitates collaboration in addressing this issue and others like it. The rush to find the answer without truly observing, orienting, deciding, and acting will initiate that vicious cycle. So in my 25 years of service, I've never been questioned if I've experienced racism or if I felt the sting of explicit and implicit bias. More importantly, I've never experienced it directly. However, there are people in our armed forces that are starting to transition that have felt it, and we don't know about it. We haven't asked them. I have no doubt the challenges will be plenty, but I believe in using this approach can help us, not only the military, but any organization, any person really understand the challenges to address the core problem. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Colonel King, for that candid perspective and for those challenging questions you posed to all of us on that. Next, we'll have Lieutenant Colonel Henderson Alailima explore another internal dimension of strategy, if you will, regarding the challenges that climate change poses to military readiness. Rena, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Leon. And thank you for inviting me as we discuss climate change and national security. I find it pretty interesting and fascinating to be able to discuss these two topics simultaneously. Not long ago, climate change as a national security threat rarely was discussed in the same sentence. But more recently, and especially with our new administration, more emphasis is being placed on climate change as a top threat to our national security. So today, let us start by examining how national security threats have traditionally been defined and how that definition is expanding. Then we'll talk about what is climate change and why is climate change considered a national security threat. So to start, historically, the Constitution made national security a top priority of the government, requiring the federal government to protect the nation against invasion, to provide for common defense. This notion led to national security threats being narrowly defined solely in military terms, focused on security and protection against a military attack from adversaries. But however, the rise of post-World War II globalization combined with technological advances created an increasingly interconnected and complex security environment. And faced with this reality, it became clear to our national leaders that defining national security objectives solely in terms of defending against foreign adversaries created blind spots in understanding and addressing non-military dimensions of national security. Therefore, the understanding of what constitutes a threat to national security evolved. Now, threats may come from non-military dimensions such as pandemics, economic inequality, cybersecurity, and climate change, to name a few. So let's define climate change. Climate change is a long-term change in average weather patterns, changes in temperature and precipitation as examples. Impacts of climate change include rising sea levels, rising temperature, shrinking glaciers. It can also cause more extreme and frequent weather events such as droughts, floods, hurricanes, and heat waves. So now let's talk about national security connection to climate change. How does climate change create a national security threat? First, climate change heightens and intensifies political instability and vulnerability in contested regions and vulnerable regions, and the adversaries can exploit for their further interest. Second, climate change is a direct threat to US military installations and our ability to maintain military combat readiness. Regarding the first threat of instability, the military recognizes that while climate change alone is not the cause of conflicts and instability, it acts as a threat multiplier, essentially exasperating existing tensions and instability, particularly in regions characterized by a history of fragile governments. Unforeseen extreme weather events like that are linked to climate change, such as hurricanes, heat waves, flooding, mega droughts, they intensify and they disrupt access to food, water, and resources. Fragile governments, they're unable to quickly respond to these mounting water and health, employment, and sanitation crises. And this lack of response from the government to the basic needs of its citizens can erupt and escalate into riots, conflict, tension, and violence. For example, a study published in the National Academy of Science linked Syria's 3-year drought, a drought worsened by a warming climate, to the Syrian civil war. Extreme weather caused widespread agricultural collapse and drove a mass migration of Syrian farming families into urban centers. Competition over water, food, jobs, already scarce following decades of low governance, took on an ethnic dimension, helping trigger a civil war that was linked to killing hundreds and thousands of people. Instability poses a threat to national security because adversaries can exploit unstable regions, which in turn causes an increased demand on US military engagement and employment. Extremists, terrorists, they turn unstable regions into a breeding ground for their terrorist movements. These movements have the potential to target democracies and our Western ideas. And when America is targeted by terrorism, we must respond with counterterrorism in measure, which increases our need to engage in the region. Furthermore, terrorist organizations, they attempt to weaken and undermine local governments by providing for the people in ways the government cannot. And to do this, terrorists will seek control and weaponize key resources and infrastructure. Regional infrastructure, such as the transportation systems, the overseas military bases, energy grids, military logistical hubs, and waterways, they're weaponized and controlled. And regional infrastructures, that's critical to the military's ability to rapidly deploy and operate and sustain forces anywhere and anytime in the world, to project power globally. Loss of these overseas power projection platforms and our key resources would limit America's ability to advance our interests globally. Therefore, we have a need to maintain access to these key resources, and that also requires an increase for the military to engage in the region. And when we talk about terrorists, extremists, criminal organizations, they're not the only ones who attempt to exploit the impacts of climate change. The warming Arctic, for example, that brings increased interest, competition, and military presence from our adversaries, particularly the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, as they look to control strategically important territory and resources. So we got interest and then competition. They're increasing that Arctic region as great powers, they're grabbing to control and influence in this area that was previously closed by the ice. The melting Arctic and the shrinking ice cap opens access to new energy resources, shorter and more profitable shipping routes, and strategically important territory. Also just resources. There's oil, there's gold, there's minerals in that area. Attempts to exert control and expand our influence, spheres of influence, and force unlawful claims or restrict access to these oceans has the intention and the potential to incite international competition and conflict. And this ice-free Arctic, that's just another flashpoint that will require more attention, engagement, and further militarization. Another impact of climate change that affects national security is climate change degrades our military combat readiness. The Army defines readiness as the ability of our forces to fight and succeed at our assigned missions, the ability to fight anywhere, when, and at any given time. Having a combat-ready force dissuades an adversary from acting against the US interests. And when deterrence fails, a ready force is prepared to fight and win our nation's wars. The two categories that heavily influence readiness are training and equipment. Do our own forces have the trained personnel, and is their equipment in good working order? Training and equipment testing are critical to national security because these activities, they enable the US military to maintain a competitive and capable and ready force. Increased occurrence of intensity of weather events such as flooding, desertification, drought, extreme heat, rising sea levels, the thawing permafrost, all of these things cause readiness issues because they disrupt our training and equipment testing operationally at our critical installations. In the military, we have 79 operationally critical installations, and the majority of these installations are vulnerable to climate change disruption. most prominently recurring droughts and flooding. It causes a lot of problems in our installations. A drought, for example, it dries out the vegetation, it increases temperature. And under drought conditions, the potential and severity of wildfires escalates, and thus the heat-related injuries such as exhaustion and heat stroke. These climate-induced impacts ultimately increase the number of training days, which testing or training is prohibited or even restricted. Furthermore, when it comes to flooding, extreme weather events and storm surges also impact our readiness by limiting our access to installations and also canceling our previously scheduled training and equipment testing. For example, Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, it experienced flooding and sustained serious damage to almost all its buildings after Hurricane Michael a few years ago. For months after the storm, training and equipment maintenance and schedules for nearly 1/3 of our fighter jets were disrupted. That same year, the Marines base Camp Lejeune was badly damaged by Hurricane Florence, which the Commandant of the Marine Corps came out saying the combat readiness of the Marine was cut by 1/3 of its power due to the disruptions of the storms. The damage to these bases, it undermines the readiness to our fighting forces, diverting resources and attention away from our ability to prepare for and execute missions. In time, total, these unexpected days, weeks, and months and disruption, they accumulate and have a direct impact on our national security. The takeaway is the deterioration of climate is causing the United States significant security concerns, from growing instability to the possibility of great power conflict to decline in force readiness. Climate change directly impacts the military's ability to protect America's interests. But there's good news. Although the connection between climate change and national security did not receive much attention and prioritization in the past, there is a growing acknowledgement within the military of the need to prepare for and respond to climate change in order to protect our national interests. President Biden nominated Secretary of State John Kerry to a new position as Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. In this position, he will hold the seat on the White House National Security Council and serve as the first ever climate envoy for national security. And after the announcement of Kerry, he said, and I quote, "America will soon have a government that treats climate crisis as a national security threat that it is." This appointment of Kerry, in addition him into the National Security Council, reflects President Biden's belief that climate change is a national security concern. And with this renewed acknowledgement and prioritization, the military has a chance to demonstrate that one of the nation's largest organizations in terms of personnel, equipment, budget, and logistics can go green. And thank you for your time. And I will be followed by General Abdul.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Henderson Ali-Alima, for those insights on the interface of climate change, national security, and military operations. Finally, we're going to have Brigadier General Sami discuss Pakistan's interaction with China's Belt and Road Initiative. General Sami, please.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Dr. LaShawn and Leon. It's really a privilege to interact with arguably one of the smartest set of students in the US. Delighted to be here all to share my perspective and to learn from you, more importantly, during the exchange that follows. South Asia, ladies and gentlemen, is a difficult region. It has many conflicts that apparently seem irresolvable. For the longest time, I have wondered if regionalism and economic interdependence in South Asia could be the recipe for enduring peace and regional prosperity. So in the same way, one of my topics of research in US Army War College has been on Pakistan's view of China's Belt and Road Initiative, called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. Since many of you follow history, I will briefly cover the history of Pak-China relations, Pakistan's involvement in the global war on terror that caused infrastructural gaps in the country how Pakistan is partnering with China and others to address these gaps. And in the end, we'll briefly comment on the environmental and debt sustainability aspects of some of these projects. But first, what is history without geography? So Pakistan shares a 368 miles of border with China towards its north, roughly along the Karakoram mountain range. The length of the border isn't really of much significance to the argument here, but its altitude is. This border stretch has 36 of the world's 100 highest mountain peaks, including K2, the second highest peak in the world. So one had to be one heck of a mountaineer to cross this border. Therefore, the traditional trade routes to China went through Afghanistan and the then Soviet states of Central Asia. But during the Cold War, you would imagine that was no go. So Pakistan and China practically remained isolated for much of their initial history. In 1966, however, the two countries decided to create a road link across one of the lowest points along the border. It is over 4,700 meters above the sea level. For context, it is about 1,000 feet higher than Mount Whitney, the highest mountain in the United States outside. It took 13 years to construct the world's highest paved road, finally connecting China's western Xinjiang province with Pakistan through 810 miles of Karakoram Highway, or KKH. About 1,000 workers lost their lives in the process, including a large number from Pakistan Army Corps of Engineers. Think about it as the regional equivalent of the Panama Canal that the US Army Corps of Engineers built over a century ago. So this KKH brought Pakistan and China closer, physically and diplomatically too. It was arguably one of the reasons that in early 70s, Pakistan was the main facilitator for the US-China rapprochement that led to, amongst other things, the closure of Vietnam War. Now, Pakistan is geographically located in an interesting neighborhood, to put it mildly, frankly. I just mentioned China towards north, then we have India towards east, Afghanistan and Iran towards west, and North Arabian Sea towards south, just east of the Strait of Hormuz, and you understand the significance of that area. The security situation in the region has largely remained turbulent for much of the last 4 decades. First, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, and then the global war on terror from 2001 till this day. Over the last 2 decades of global war on terror, Pakistan has suffered greatly. Peace in the country that we see today has come at a very heavy cost. More than 75,000 people have died, including more than 8,500 personnel of the law enforcement agencies. The estimated direct loss to the economy has been in excess of $200 billion. The infrastructure took a major hit too, particularly the power, road, rail, and industrial sectors. To give you an idea, by 2014, Pakistan's power sector had a capacity shortfall of around 7,000 megawatts. The implication was that the country had to experience an average of 4 to 6 hours of daily power outages. For the rural areas, it was almost twice as bad. Apart from the human suffering, it was also adversely affecting the industrial productivity and the economy. One estimate put this annual loss as up to 3% of GDP. To get out of this downward spiral, an emergent intervention was needed. In April 2015, Pakistan signed a series of memoranda of understanding with China for Chinese investment in power, road, rail infrastructure. Some areas were also identified for development of special industrial and economic zones The idea was to address the power sector crisis on fast track and simultaneously develop the other sectors. 5 years on now, after completion of many power projects today, Pakistan has substantial surplus power generation capacity, including a growing proportion of renewable energy. The industrial sector is now working without disruption, and the economy is on the mend with promising future. There have been two major concerns on these projects, though, environmental sustainability and debt sustainability. First, the environment. CPEC included 8 coal power projects. 3 major reasons for that. One, it's the quickest to bring power online, given the state of the economy at that time was kind of a compulsion. Two, coal was almost missing from Pakistan's power generation mix at only 3%. 3, Pakistan sat on world's second largest lignite coal reserve, completely untapped. Going for the coal power plants. Although coal still accounts for only 16% after these 8 projects of Pakistan's energy mix, as compared to 58 and 56% in the large neighboring economies of China and India, Pakistan has announced a no new coal power plants policy in December last year and is pushing for renewable energy technologies. As for the debt sustainability, it's been a big question mark. Cumulative Chinese loan represents only 6% of Pakistan's public debt portfolio. The rest comes from other sources like the sovereign states, Paris Club, Bretton Woods institutions, Asian Development Bank, and other foreign and domestic financial institutions. There is parliamentary oversight and consultation with partners like IMF and World Bank that ensures that only the financially viable projects are approved as part of CPEC. The focus of CPEC, if I may repeat, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or BRI for short, project. Now, the focus of these projects these days is to seek foreign investment in special economic zones for export-oriented industries that can leverage Pakistan's abundant raw materials and cheaper labor force. Work on 2 of these special economic zones is in advanced stage, and these are attracting investment from many countries due to lucrative incentives like tax breaks and many others. To sum up, Pakistan and China have had good relations for more than 70 years. In 1970s, this relationship had been an asset for another friend, the United States, in opening up towards China. Pakistan's protracted involvement in the global war on terror had caused large gaps in infrastructure, particularly power, road, rail, and industrial sectors. China has invested in some of these projects, while the remaining are being undertaken through national funding. Pakistan has recently taken steps to move away from coal power plants towards more renewable energy projects, and the Chinese debt still forms a small portion of Pakistan's public debt. Just to emphasize, Pakistan does not look at China-Pakistan Economic Corridor between China and Pakistan only, and has welcomed many partners to invest in various facets of the economy. It is an ongoing effort, and one hopes it will bring the country in coming out of the effects of the global war on terror. Thank you all for your time. I'd be happy to answer your questions on this or any other topic related to South Asia. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you, General Sami. So now we're going to go to the question and answers, and I've seen some really good questions come in, but for the sake of time, we're going to take a few representative questions for each of our speakers and see what we can get through in the time we have remaining. So the first question that has come in is going to be for Lieutenant Colonel King. And it's a question saying, are there other militaries or other US organizations that can serve as a model for improvement on diversity and inclusion? And Adesa, you might be interested in talking about any conversations you've had with some of our international partners who attend the Army War College about this issue.
That's a great question. And to answer directly, no. there are no other militaries that I've seen and experienced that is as large and as at least diverse as we have. Okay, again, been to several militaries, been to several countries, and to look at something that we can resemble us as far as in our size and diverse, I haven't really found that and seen that. Now, I look at some of the British military; they have some of that, but not to the scale that we have right now. So, that's something that I am looking at is where can we find either a smaller military or some military that we can kind of scale up. Does that make sense? That's where the things that I'm thinking through right now. But good question, very good question. I've been thinking about that myself. What can we model?
No, I appreciate that. It's a challenging problem, and surely we're not the only organization or military that is struggling with those aspects of the issue. And there are some deep-rooted factors that we still need to be addressing. So I appreciate your observations on that comment. So I'd like to direct the next question to Lieutenant Colonel Henderson Alialima about climate change. You mentioned that the US did not previously consider climate change or pandemics as a national security threat. Do you think the frameworks of how the US defines threats needs to be adjusted to account for more of these long-term transnational challenges? And if so, how? You're muted right now.
Okay, thank you for that question. It's great. So when we talk about the framework that defines threats, when we talk about the framework that the United States uses, we're talking about the national security strategy. And what we're saying is the security of what? And those are typically the security of the United States interests. And although presidents have changed every 4 to 8 years and from administration to administration, surprisingly, our interests are pretty much remain stable and the same. And our interests in the United States are fairly enduring. Our interest to maintain sovereignty through physical security of the homeland, that's where we as the Defense Department come in heavily. Promotion of American values, a stable international order, and economic prosperity, those interests. So those are pretty stable, and whatever threatens those, we try to have an approach to it. What's changed really is that in the past, United States, oceans and oceans away, nothing that happened overseas affected us as intense that it does now with globalization, and literally a terrorist in their home office can send cyber attacks and disrupt the United States. So with that globalization and just being able to be touched so easily, that's really what is defining our threats now. And so the framework to define that's always been there, that's there. It's just now that we're more accessible and we're more open out there, that's where it changes.
Thank you, Rita. Obviously, these diverse transnational threats and long-term threats are very challenging. And it's not just a military component that is involved in addressing those threats as a whole of government, whole of nation focus area for the future. And so we play a small role as members of the Department of Defense in addressing that. And I appreciate the fact that you frame that within the broader national security strategy that has to be addressed across the whole of government to address these very challenging threats in a complex environment. Our next question will be, let me scroll back up here to the question. A great question about diversity, and again, for Colonel Adesa King. There was concern about applying the question of diversity to artificial intelligence in military uses, because artificial intelligence, as it's currently programmed, seems to have some of the implicit biases of the programmers programmed into the artificial intelligence itself and may have adverse consequences for what we do. Are you aware of any of these issues, and what should we do about them?
Well, two things. One, I am aware of of that issue, which leads to the algorithms and whatnot of how these systems are even formulated. The second thing I would say is that because our society is open, we're susceptible to those to those biases and how it's being utilized. So this is where, for us, being aware of that is very important. That's why having a human interaction in there to kind of check it is important for us. I've dealt with some of that myself, as far as while deployed, as far as, you know, the attempt of kind of using some facial stuff, but you just have to really be aware of it. And with our military, what's key is our leadership is not only aware of it, but we're involved in that. Hey, how do we identify these biases and who the person are that are putting these algorithms together? Great question.
Colonel King. And I would also remind our audience that artificial intelligence can be used in a variety of capacities. And so facial recognition and some of those areas where there could be implicit biases encoded may not be the only way we can use artificial intelligence. Another panel memo from our Eisenhower program is looking at artificial intelligence engaging inbound threats like missiles and other military type of objects that would be less subject or not subject to those types of biases. But what a great question, and on the edge of the future of warfare and the issues we need to be addressing. The next question I'd like to pose from our audience will be for General Sami. And this kind of bridges your topic with Colonel Henderson Ali-Alima's topic. So tying in the earlier discussion about climate change, what role do you think increasing water scarcity will play in your region? And do you think the Indus Waters Treaty will hold up under this increasing stress? So, you know, changes in the glaciers formation in the mountains there and all that has a significant impact for your region. I'd like to hear your perspective.
Right, that's a brilliant question, and I'm so glad someone brought that up. But a little background on what is Indus Water Treaty, for just to bring everybody on the same page, is that Pakistan and India share rivers, and when these two countries were formed after the British left the Indian subcontinent, there was an issue with the India being upper riparian and the Pakistan being the lower riparian, and World Bank came in and brokered a deal between the two countries in 1960 that divided the water, 3 rivers going to Pakistan and another 3 going to India. I do understand that revision of the Indus Water Treaty does come up as political rhetoric on both sides, mind you. But in the matters of national interest, I also believe that what is important to see is that what is working and what is not working. So fortunately, Indus Water Treaty, despite the belligerence that the two countries have seen over the past 61 years, has held on. So it has apparently worked and worked very well. I think there are other ways so I believe there is no need to review or revoke either unilaterally or bilaterally the Indus Water Treaty, because it does guarantee something. It may not be ideal for both the countries, but it does guarantee stability in the region. And if it is not there, I think more instability will ensue. But what can also work in terms of climate change and how can it be affected? For example, since 1984, Pakistan and India, or should I say India and Pakistan have militarized the Siachen Glacier area. It is the second largest glacier in the world outside the polar region, and it constitutes the source of the fertile plains of Ganges and Indus River. And the studies conducted show that because of this protracted military activity in that region, Siachen Glacier had receded by 5.9 kilometers over the 20 years, 1989 to 2009. I don't have the fresh numbers here. And that is serious because these economies depend a lot on agriculture. So for long-term food security, for the fact that these are economies that are dependent on agriculture, And because there is going to be climate change, effects of climate change, apart from the military activity that's going on there, I do hope there is a reconsideration of demilitarization of Siachen Glacier area. And I think the US government can play a possible role, because climate change, environmental protection is a big facet of the Biden administration. I hope things turn out well. So to sum up, hold on to what's working, and that's in the water treaty. Explore areas where it's not working, Siachen Glacier and demilitarization there. And I hope and believe the world sees this, and the two countries see this and move towards that direction. But thank you. Excellent question again.
Thank you, General Sami. I'd like to kind of open this up and follow that thread. When we are at the War College, we're talking about strategy, big picture issues. And I'm going to direct this question to Lieutenant Colonel Henderson Alialima, but it's related to what you just talked about, General Sami, about climate and other issues like climate that affect national security. And Nathan Kelsey wrote, he thought it was really cool that we are now considering non-military factors in our defense planning, but he was curious to think about it in terms of mission creep into non-military areas as well. And I might say it's maybe not necessarily mission creep, but it adds new missions potentially as an outflow of these challenges and makes our environment, operating environment, more complex. So Colonel Henderson Alialima, would you like to add any thoughts or respond to that question?
Yes, no, I agree with you, Leon, exactly. So it goes to the old adage, jack of all trades, master of none. So that mission creep, pretty much it makes us have to respond to a lot of different things and extends us a lot more. But as you kind of mentioned, I'm not sure if it would be more so mission creep. It's just that it's the unavoidable complexity of our security environment that we have right now. And we have to start addressing those problems. But what we have is a situation where, let's say, for example, climate change, that can't be solved by the military alone. So these complex problems are not solved by any one of the departments. And it's that whole government approach that was mentioned earlier. So when we have these situations, we're not always the lead when it comes. So when you're saying defense planning, even though it might look like a defense issue, we're not necessarily always the lead. So for example, with climate change, we work closely with the State Department and USAID for development initiatives, and we have a piece of that pie. So we are going to have more and more issues due to the fact that our missions are more complex and the situations that we encounter are more complex. But the great thing is that we don't have to do it alone, and we just have to be aware of the more things that we have to deal with.
Thank you very much. Boy, the time went very quickly, and unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions at this point. And I'm sorry for those who asked great questions that we weren't able to get to. But I do want to thank you for being here with us today. It's part of our mission to be here and interfacing with you. And so thank you to Perry House for hosting us today, and thank you for taking the time. We hope you found this dialogue to be worthwhile, as we did, and we believe that our national security is strengthened when our citizens and our service members are well informed and we have a well-tended civil-military relationship. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their insights and taking the time to lead this critical conversation on an evolving and complex geopolitical stage dominated by a range of pressing issues, including China's Belt and Road Initiative, climate change and national security, and military diversity and inclusion. Thank you to Colonel Perkowski for moderating such a fascinating discussion. And thank you again to the Army War College Eisenhower Series College Program for bringing this wealth of expertise to Penn and Perry-Wald House once again. We look forward to this every year and want to get on your calendars already for next year. Last, but of course not least, thanks to all of you in our audience for joining us for yet another edition of The World Today. We hope to see you again next week on March 9th for a conversation with renowned climatologist Michael Mann on the fight to take back our planet. And then on March 16th with the Penn Center for Research on Coronaviruses and Other Emerging Pathogens for an event on the worst case scenarios, another pandemic. Find the links to these events in the chat and please sign up and spread the word. As always, you can access a recording of this conversation on our YouTube channel, and you can find out about all the great events we have planned for the rest of the semester by joining our mailing list and following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'll drop links to those as well in the chat function. Thank you, all of you, for being here with us today, and see you next time. Bye-bye.